Hello, my fellow seekers. I am covering the Apple River sentencing. This trial occurred back in April, and Nicolae Miu is the defendant, and hopefully y'all have followed it. I'm trying to just get the important parts out. I do have an overview of the case in my playlist, and when I'm through with this, I can also drop a link to it in the description, because this case to me is where you're going to see people absolutely divided in the middle, and I say that in the video. Some people are going to say he's guilty, and some people are going to say he's not guilty. And I understand why it's extremely difficult. It's not so clear-cut as the ones I've covered, like Darrell Brooks, the upcoming and the ongoing Sarah Boone trial, Hannah Payne, Shonda Vander Ark. Those are pretty clear-cut. So it was real easy for me to roast and poke fun and, at those guys. I mean, in a humorous way, because I do like to try to mix humor, because some of this stuff is deep. And so I actually recorded this morning. And then once I went through the sentencing, I thought, no, I'm not going to do the whole sentencing. I'm going to try to pick out bits and pieces that stood out to me. And you can always go and watch the complete sentencing, but sometimes people just like a summary. And I'm not real good about summarizing, because sometimes I still make things too long, because I think, oh, this might be something that'll be interesting to you, but it's like, hey, chill, Sally. They can always go look if they need more information. So with this one, it really is a mix. And I got to be honest, it's made me emotional. And, everybody's going to be affected differently. All I would say is that with this case and other cases where people are split, just be nice, agree to disagree. You may disagree with me. I can see both sides. I ended up feeling sad for everyone by the time I was just studying and the sentencing and just listening to both sides and all that kind of stuff. But like I said, this would have been up a long time ago, but I just thought about it. And sometimes it's good when people do it live, when you all watch it together and all that. And I realized, and that's what I did today, even though it wasn't going to be live, but you were going to see my reaction. But then with me, like I said, I'm somebody who has to chew on things, digest them. And I think if I have opportunity to do that, I do a better job of presenting it to you, hopefully. I'm still flailing here, and I'll continue to flail, but as time goes, perhaps I'll get better. But anyhow, I'm going to start off. I actually really enjoyed, I think this is, 9? Yeah. Fox 9 in Minneapolis. They did a great job of covering it. I like the aspect that the reporters kind of give you a little backdrop. If you haven't seen it, and if you have, it's still good to remember what charges he's facing. I mean, I know that he could be facing, I think it was 52 when this occurred. I believe it was 2 years ago, yesterday, July 30th. So, but they're going to do a little background on it, these reporters, and then I'm just going to do a little bit of what the prosecution says, what the defense says, and then the judge, and then we'll go from there.
Wednesday morning from our Fox 9 streaming center for our gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Apple River stabbing, a case that has now taken 2 full years to work its way through the criminal justice system. I am Paul Bloom. Of course, we've now reached the sentencing phase after a St. Croix County jury found Nicolae Miu guilty of half a dozen reckless counts following a nearly 2-week trial that most of you probably were with us for in April. Now, I want to run through those verdicts for you now. Guilty, first-degree reckless homicide for the stabbing death of Stillwater teenager Isaac Schumann. Guilty, 4 counts, first-degree recklessly endangering safety for stabbing 4 others. These 4 survived their injuries. For one, A.J. Martin, top left corner of your screen there. Somewhat miraculously, as we learned, doctors had to revive him after the violent encounter on the popular Tubing River in western Wisconsin. The others hurt that day, Riley Madison, as well as brothers Tony and Dante Carlson. And then one final guilty verdict, battery, Madison Cohen. The jury finding Nicolae Miu through that first punch or blow, leading to the escalation of the conflict between a couple groups of tubers and the now 54-year-old. It is important to note as we await sentencing, there are no specific sentencing guidelines as we have here in Minnesota when we talk about Wisconsin. So going into today's hearing, we really do not know what Circuit Court Judge Michael Waterman will do. We know Miu is looking at decades in prison, in fact, upwards of 100 years behind bars. But again, it depends how Judge Waterman wants to sentence. Now, before we look too far ahead this morning, let's take a look back at how we got here.
Go! It doesn't matter. Go! He's not even looking for little girls!
It is the cell phone video that defined the case and divided the community.
They were attacking me from all directions, and I truly feared for my life.
It also sparked a debate over the limits of self-defense.
Nicolae was not in fear, he snapped.
And left everyone asking, what if Nicolae Miu had just walked away?
Judge, the defense calls Nick Miu.
Mr. Miu, please stand. Raise your right hand. The clerk will administer the oath.
In riveting testimony, the defendant took the stand at his April trial and continued to justify his actions and his fears.
I stood my ground. I stayed in place.
You never backed up 1 step, did you?
No,
You had your knife out and you were prepared to use it.
to defend myself.
But prosecutors exposed a series of lies Miu told authorities in the aftermath of the deadly encounter.
What do you think was happening at that
They
time?
were fighting me. They pointed the knife at me. Both boys pointed the knife at me.
It took the jury less than 7 hours
Okay, please hand the verdict forms to the bailiff.
to reach unanimous verdicts on half a dozen charges. Guilty, first-degree reckless homicide for the death of Stillwater teenager Isaac Schumann. Guilty, 4 counts, first-degree recklessly endangering safety for those who survived their stab wounds.
Question, did Mr. Miu commit the crime while using a dangerous weapon? Answer, yes.
And finally, guilty, battery for slugging Madison Cohen, a flashpoint that ignited the escalating violence on the Apple River that hot July afternoon.
I feel that justice was served.
I spoke to a juror by phone afterwards. He asked to remain anonymous.
I mean, it's not like anybody had a fence behind him or were holding him there. He could have went, even if it was the wrong direction, he could have walked away.
On Wednesday, Judge Michael Waterman will sentence Miu for his actions that day. Not walking away, lying, and ultimately killing Schumann.
It's been 21 months we've been waiting for justice for Isaac Michael Schumann. And we got it today.
Miu faces decades behind bars, but with no sentencing guidelines in Wisconsin, Judge Waterman has full discretion.
In many ways, self-defense is a community standard, and it's very dependent upon which group of 12 people within the community you ask.
Miu's defense attorney, Aaron Nelson, hoping for some humanity for the now 54-year-old.
But we're talking about 30 seconds in this man's life that he didn't set this up. He didn't want to be in that spot. He didn't try to be in that spot. He was in that spot. He did the best that he could. He's now been convicted of a crime for what he did. But that 30 seconds shouldn't just mean he dies in prison.
So what I will say, and I did say it in the other video when I first shared this, is that I really wasn't very fond of the prosecution. I liked the defense, Aaron Nelson there, and you can just tell that he got really close to Mr. Miu. There must have been something about him, I'm not sure, but he really was passionate about it. I know a lot of times we hate defense attorneys, and I'm sure as the family who lost someone or who was injured don't like him very much. But then I have to look at the other side. What, God forbid, because one of my greatest fears is being in jail. I don't know why. I don't do anything that would lend itself to that conclusion, but I just am. I'm paranoid. And so I would hope that I would have somebody like him. Well, right now he looks a little goofy. Well, that's better. Okay. Because he, you know, what if you are accused of something and you're not guilty? You know, they have to do their job too. And can you imagine all the hate they get from people? So it's like, okay, so we're going to give the defense some grace today. Everybody some grace. So prior to this, the victims gave their impact statements, but the judge did not allow them to be recorded. So that's already been done. And probably because it's just so traumatizing for everyone. They didn't need that extra, bunch of millions of eyes looking at them. So the impact statements have been given now. And so I'll play a little bit of the prosecution, a little bit of the defense, and go from there. Hey, that's them. It's not me this time. It usually is me.
Obviously, a homicide. Any homicide is serious.
Oh, dear. There you go.
This case, Nicolae Miu killed 17-year-old Isaac Schumann. There's very little I can say about the effect on the victims that hasn't been said or expressed better by his family, both at trial and today with the victim impact statements. What part of what makes this so tragic and horrific is how easily Nicolae Miu could have avoided all of this. As I said, after he was insulted, he could have just let the boys float away. Instead, he charged up onto them. When the boys were yelling at him to leave, he doesn't. When another group comes to intervene to help, to yell at him, tell him to leave, he doesn't. Instead, while multiple people are telling him, pleading with him, yelling at him to leave, he's smirking and he takes out his pocket knife. The defense filed a memo that presumes that Nicolae Miu actually believed his life was in danger, and that belief was just unreasonable based on the verdict. I don't think that's the case. I think the evidence shows he snapped, as we argued to the jury. I think that's evidenced in his attempt to flee afterwards to avoid responsibility. His washing the knife, ditching the knife, saying nothing to his friends and family that were there. His playing dumb with Sheriff Knutson when he's first apprehended, acting like he didn't know what happened, saying he saw what looked like kids being kids. Maybe they were fighting. I think it's shown by his countless lies in his interview with Lieutenant Hart.
Okay, I'm going to move to another clip about phone calls he made from jail, because this could go on and on. I do want to say, and I did say it in the other video, what makes it so hard is, if you watch it, everyone had been drinking, including Mr. Miu, but he was not intoxicated. Everyone else involved, the teens and what they call the older adults that were maybe in their early 20s that came to help the teens, their alcohol level was very high. It says, that was noted in the trial. So that's what's kind of hard. I don't know why what was really bad is that he left and he he didn't even really say anything to his family. He just, okay, we're just going to float down the river. Then he ditched his knife, as they said. And then he put on different clothes and all of that. And I don't know why he did all the lies. I think if he'd stayed there and said, hey, we need an ambulance, maybe he was in shock, but it did look really, really bad. But having said that, and not to be derogatory to the victims and the family who lost Isaac, because I know they were just kids, but they were like pretty bad. I mean, that pack mentality can be scary. Whether he was scared or not, I don't know. I'm just trying to give a little bit of both sides. If I had a teenager, my kids are grown, I would probably sit them down and say, this is why you don't drink alcohol, because I do think alcohol leads to a lot of problems. People just aren't acting themselves. They might act a little more cocky. Who knows? But, that's what makes it, so sad. But, all right, on to the next.
Character of the defendant is also relevant for sentencing. The defendant's 54 years old. As the PSI talks about, he came here from Romania when he was 15, worked as an engineer, had no criminal history. He's been divorced 3 times. He has one son who lives in Romania, who he hasn't seen in 10 years. One odd thing from the PSI I noted is he spoke very highly of his dad and denied any abuse from his dad. But there's a public restraining order where he and his brother said that they're abused by their father. I don't know how relevant it is, just a little bizarre discrepancy I noticed. He talked a lot about his own struggles, about he's depressed and his health issues. In the PSI, he talked very little about the effect of his crimes. And that's been a present fact throughout this case, is no remorse from the defendant.
The prosecutor did bring up some of the family and friends impact statements, how traumatic it was to see their friends, a few of them were literally gutted. Thankfully, one survived. I have that in the video that I recorded from the trial. And how, Isaac, all his hopes and dreams are gone. Very sad. Madison, the one, I guess, who was punched, hit, whatever. I think she said she decided she didn't want to have any children because she had seen Isaac's mom come to the shore, and I guess there was an RN. A lot of really kind people came forth that day who was trying to revive Isaac, but of course that didn't happen. And Madison said seeing his mom be so in such grief and sadness just made her decide she didn't want to have children and have to go through a loss like that, which I can completely understand. I just thought that was worth mentioning.
He would at least feel sorry that somebody was killed.
This is still the
because
prosecution.
of his actions. There's been no evidence of that. At trial, he was only emotional talking about his dog, never emotional about the horrific injuries or the death of Isaac. I'm sure his attorney, and maybe even himself, will talk today about how remorseful he is. I think that rings hollow. Every defendant claims remorse at sentencing. What's much more enlightening about how he truly feels is how he acts, what he said leading up to today. All he really mentioned in the PSI that would suggest remorse is he's very sorry for everyone involved. No specific mention about killing Isaac Schumann, a 17-year-old, or the loss of Isaac for his family. Throughout trial, the heartbreaking testimony of Elena and the other witnesses and victims, there's no emotion from him. And I believe his true feelings are evident in his calls with his brother. He has numerous jail phone calls with his brother speaking Romanian, or perhaps he was a little less careful about what he was saying because he thought maybe it wouldn't be translated. He has a tendency, well, one, he consistently disparages the boys. He has a tendency to refer to them as other than human. There's no, defense can correct me if I'm wrong, there's never any hint of remorse for his actions. Instead, I'll just read from one section. He says, "At jail, these bastards got me here. Well, it is what it is, but at least I'm alive. I was able to fight in order to survive. You got it? At least I survived the attack. And now look, the bastards are free. The bandits from hell, they are free, and I'm here. I'm victimized again." No, the bastards are free, and I'm here. No acknowledgement whatsoever that Isaac is not here. He killed Isaac. I'm sure there's going to be a large attempt to paint him as this great person. His jail phone calls, I think, tell a different story.
Thank you, Judge. I just want to start by obviously acknowledging that this was a tragedy all around. We completely understand and appreciate the heartbreaking loss and the grief that was suffered by the Schumann family, the other victims, and their entire family, their friends, everybody here in the courtroom for the most part. It's obvious that Isaac Schumann was a unique and special human being that was loved by innumerable people. As Your Honor knows, here today, defense has a unique role in this process. And so, while as a human being, I definitely heard what was said, I'm going to focus on our role today, and I'm going to focus on the galleon factors. And the galleon factors, as we all know, and we'll talk about it later, talk a lot about Mr. Miu, the seriousness of the crime, and the need to protect the public. So I just want the court to know, and obviously the public to know, that we heard the victims. We understand and appreciate that. I'm just going to move through and talk about the galleon factors. I think it's always important to, when I think of galleon, which I think it was cited in my sentencing memo, Your Honor, and I'm sure Your Honor's heard me say this before at other times. I've been in front of Your Honor numerous times, but my favorite quote in all of Wisconsin jurisprudence is from paragraph 36 of galleon. "Experience has taught us to be cautious when reaching high consequence conclusions about human nature that seem to be intuitively correct at the moment. Better instead is a conclusion that is based on more complete and accurate information and reached by an organized framework for the exercise of discretion." I know Your Honor knows that quote. I know Your Honor will appropriately exercise your discretion. I didn't mean to imply that you wouldn't, but I think it's good for all of us, and I know, obviously, the court, Your Honor, is my audience today. So back to galleon. As Your Honor knows, galleon cites the law, the starting point for the law on any sentence, even this sentence, and I'm quoting the law. Probation should be considered as the first alternative. That's what galleon says. It then quotes Bastion, Bastion, paragraph 25, adopted the ABA standard 1.3 relating to probation. Again, as Your Honor knows, and maybe Your Honor will address this in your comments, but this is the framework where we as lawyers in the court of law, in a in a system designed by social contract that we've all agreed upon, this is the framework which we do. And it says probation should be the sentence unless the court finds that, 1, confinement is necessary to protect the public from future criminal activity by Mr. Miu, or 2, Mr. Miu is in need of correctional treatment, which can most effectively be provided if he is confined. Or 3, which I think is what the majority of what we'll be talking about today, I will be, is number 3, or it would unduly depreciate the seriousness of the offense if a sentence of probation were imposed. So with that framework, Judge, I want to talk about those 3 different factors, or 3 different questions that need to be answered. Obviously, within that, Gallion also talks about the 3 sentencing factors, which I think are somewhat parallel, if not consistent with that, and that is the character of Mr. Miu, the need to protect the public, and the seriousness of the offense. So I'm using it in the framework of these 3 questions outlined by the standard 1.3 of the ABA standards. So first off, is confinement necessary to protect the public from Mr. Miu? That's where I think we think of his character, right? And I understand that the state and some of the other speakers today made comments about Mr. Miu's character, and I understand why they may have those opinions. But the facts, the cold hard facts, are that Mr. Miu, prior to this time when he was on the river, has never been in trouble. He was an upstanding, moral human being. He had, as you know, in the sentencing memorandum and in the PSI, but just to quickly outline, he was born in Romania. He and his family, for lack of a better term, were treated poorly there. A circumstance that was outside of his control, and they managed to leave that circumstance and come to America. But like some other things in Mr. Miu's life, that wasn't in his control. He didn't sign up to be born into a communist Romanian country. He didn't sign up to be persecuted in that communist regime. He came here and had what I think we would all consider the American dream. An immigrant, came here, he learned the language, he adopted America, he assimilated into our country, and he was a productive member of society, getting an education, being employed, and having positive relationships throughout his adulthood. The state has mentioned some things about his character that I feel like I don't want to belabor it too much, because I don't think at the end of the day there's really that much question about his character. The state's talked about his phone calls, right? What Your Honor probably knows is he's been in custody for 2 years and a day. About 732 days he's been in the St. Croix County Jail. During that time, he's had some phone calls. The state mentioned some of these phone calls. I will just say, without us being distracted by these phone calls, that we dispute the translation on many of those phone calls. In particular, the word bastard. That's not the Romanian word that Nicolae used. I think the proper translation would be an unfortunate. And so that's a very different context in which this was said. Second thing I think is Mr. Miu has been in custody for this time. Like, I think anybody, whether he was involved in this traumatic event, right? He's been suffering PTSD while he's in the jail. That's documented through the jail records, through the medical records. He's been going through his own process. These phone calls that are mentioned, you don't get a timeline. You don't get a date. Many of them, based upon my memory of those phone calls, which wasn't a huge part of the trial, was these happened in the first 30 to 60 days of his incarceration. These weren't from yesterday. These weren't from last month. These weren't from around the time of the trial. These were much, much further back in time. And I say that because remorse is something that the state talked about, and they talked about it in the context of Mr. Miu's character. think Your Honor knows, the criminal justice system in America is good at several things. It's not really good at allowing sometimes a space for a person in Mr. Miu's position to express remorse in a safe space. The only people that he'd be able to do that with are myself and Mr. Tearful. I don't want to make myself a witness. But I can tell Your Honor, as officer of the court, he has processed this. He has shown in the numerous times, the tens if not hundreds of times that I've met with him, remorse over different times in the action. A lot of mixed emotions. Probably not one emotion that he's been showing, but there has definitely been remorse. One story that he's given me permission to tell is very soon into this, after the event. The state approached me as his lawyer and asked about the release of Isaac's body. As we heard from his sister, Isaac's body was evidence. That must be a devastating thing that they had to deal with. And Mr. Anderson reached out to me to see if the defense would release the body. And of course, I did my duty. The first thing I did is I went and I spoke with my client, Mr. Miu. And when I made that question, I approached Mr. Miu with that question, he looked at me aghast. He could not believe that that had not already happened. And he broke down emotionally and wept. He just wept. Maybe there was other things that had came in. Maybe this was a time when I first met him, when we were starting to get to know him. Maybe it's a time that this loss that had happened became more real for him. But in that moment, he showed what I think was remorse. They weren't there to see it. And they weren't there to hear about it until today. And if we could redesign this criminal justice system in a way that maybe we could give some of those things to the victims' families beforehand as we're going through this, I think there might be other healing, there might be other things that can go through. I understand and appreciate why they might feel the way that they do. But I can tell you, I've been with him. I've been with him over those 732 days, and he has shown remorse. Is it mixed? Is it complicated? Absolutely. Are there times that he has some other feelings that are all mixed in with this? Yes. But I submit to you that he has shown remorse, and it has become more and more and more so as we have moved through the process.
So, oftentimes we say, when people are up there, where are your tears? Where are your tears? He did have tears. Are you all convinced that he's remorseful? I'm probably just a softie, but...
Mr. Miu, this is your opportunity to make a statement, or, if you wish, to offer any reason why I should not impose a sentence today. Would you like to make a statement?
Judge, he's written out a statement to me. I had it in hand. I printed it just for easier. I think he wants to read it, and then I'll submit it to the court, so it's just a part of the record.
Certainly. Mr. Miu.
Do you want to stand?
Dear parents, family, and friends of Isaac, I would like to start by letting you know how deeply sorrowful I have been. I am, and I will always be, for the real fact that Isaac is not with you anymore, and that I was directly involved in his very tragic and unimaginable death at such an early age. I never meant for this tragedy to occur. My soul is broken. My heart is very heavy. And I will never be the same carrying such a heavy burden and sorrow. I pray to God for forgiveness, compassion, and love for everyone affected directly and indirectly by the outcome of this tragic event. I'm hoping that you appreciate how much I'm sorry for the outcome of those events. I'm very sorry.
We'll have that marked as Exhibit 3, Judge.
That'll be received into the record.
That's all then from the defense, Judge.
Mr. Miu appears today in court for sentencing. Count 1 is first-degree reckless homicide, which is a Class B felony. With the dangerous weapon enhancer, the maximum possible penalty is 45 years of incarceration, initial confinement, and 20 years of extended supervision. On counts 2 through 5, Mr. Miu appears for sentencing on first-degree reckless endangerment, Class F felonies with the dangerous weapon enhancer. The maximum possible penalties are 12.5 years initial confinement and 5 years of extended supervision. Last count 6 is battery. That is a misdemeanor. With the dangerous weapon enhancer, he faces a maximum possible sentence of 15 months. In preparation for today's sentencing, I reviewed a number of materials. First, I reviewed the pre-sentence investigation report prepared by the Department of Corrections. It's a 43-page report that provided me with information that I knew and information that I did not know about Mr. Miu, about his victims, families, about Mr. Miu's background, about all aspects of this case, many of which were talked about today. That PSI report also included a sentencing recommendation. I also reviewed Mr. Nelson's sentencing memorandum. It too was very helpful. It provided more information about Mr. Miu and his background, and I valued that information. Mr. Nelson submitted numerous letters from Mr. Miu's personal friends and coworkers. I read all of those. I also read the relevant portions of the file, including the complaint, the jury instructions, and the verdict. In a moment, I will pronounce a sentence that I believe is just and fair. When deciding on a sentence, I must consider the gravity of the offense, including the effect on the victims. I must consider Mr. Miu's character and his rehabilitative needs. I must consider the need to protect the public. The sentence must be based on the facts of the case and the law, not personal considerations, passions, or prejudices. But judges in Wisconsin have a great deal of discretion when imposing a sentence. Unlike many jurisdictions, we do not have sentencing guidelines or grids to follow. I want all of you to know that I have given this case a great deal of thought. I take my responsibility seriously. There is nothing more difficult or more solemn than imposing a sentence on another human being. As far as the gravity of the offense, the jury has spoken. Any efforts to relitigate this case are simply without merit. I firmly believe that the American criminal justice system is the best ever devised. It's not perfect, but I cannot think of a system of justice that is better at finding the truth while preserving the rights of the accused. In this case, 12 jurors reached a unanimous verdict. These 12 jurors were selected from a panel of more than 150 people. I, along with the attorneys for both sides, chose these jurors because they could be fair and impartial. The jurors came from all corners of our great county. They came from all walks of life. They were men, they were women, they were young, they were old. They listened to 8 days of intense trial testimony. They examined dozens of exhibits. They deliberated for 8 hours. In the end, they reached a unanimous verdict and found beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Miu was guilty of reckless homicide, reckless endangerment, and battery. Now, there are two key takeaways from this jury's verdict that I want to mention. First, the jury rejected the state's claim that Mr. Miu intended to kill Isaac Schumann or the surviving stabbing victims. In other words, the jury rejected the most serious crimes that would have sent Mr. Miu to prison for the rest of his life. Second, the jury rejected Mr. Miu's claims of self-defense. That means Mr. Miu did not reasonably believe that he was preventing or terminating an unlawful interference with his person, or he did not reasonably believe the force used was necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to himself. This jury found Mr. Miu guilty of reckless homicide and 4 counts of reckless endangerment. These crimes are serious. They mean that Mr. Miu did not think about the consequences of his behavior and that he showed utter disregard for life when he stabbed 5 people. For that, he will be held accountable, but the court sentence must reflect the reality that it was reckless conduct that the jury found him guilty of, not intentional conduct, which is punishable much more harshly. In weighing the gravity of the offense, I consider the impact these crimes have had on the victims. The battery to Madison Cohen was unjustified. While she did not suffer any permanent physical injuries, she has mentally suffered over this entire ordeal. She described to the PSI author the toll this case has taken and continues to take on her. This offense has devastated Isaac Schumann's parents and stepfather. No parent should have to endure the loss of a child. They have had to cope with the senseless death of a loved one while enduring the weight of the criminal justice system that can be slow, confusing, and sometimes frustrating to victims. To you and to your family, there are probably no words that I can say today that will alleviate your grief. But I would be remiss for not expressing my sincere condolences to all of you. I am sorry for your loss and what you've had to endure. Although it must have been difficult, I appreciate each of you speaking today and sharing a glimpse into Isaac's life and who he was. It sounds like he was a wonderful person, a bright young man who had an unlimited future. And for that, we in this community have lost. A.J. Martin and Riley Madison would have died on that riverbank had it not been for the swift action of law enforcement and EMTs and other tubers who helped to treat their wounds and stabilize their condition. They had long hospital stays, but they were very fortunate to receive high-quality medical treatment that restored their health. But we heard from them about the toll this matter has taken on their health, their mental psyche, and their prospects for the future. Anthony Carlson and Dante Carlson's wounds were less severe, but the risk to life was still present, obviously because the knife was directed into their torso near vital organs. But they fortunately have survived. Each of these surviving stabbing victims suffered permanent physical disfigurement, and that can't be overlooked. And we've heard from A.J. Martin just about how that disfigurement can affect one's life. In assessing Mr. Miu's character, I must consider his conduct on July 30. Mr. Miu's crimes were the product of circumstance, not intent. Mr. Miu was not looking to cause trouble or hurt anyone, but he made a series of very poor decisions. When confronted with words and boorish taunts and insults, Mr. Miu drew a knife and he struck Madison Cohen. That quickly culminated in senseless, lethal violence. He left the scene, leaving his victims to die, while casually floating past them and emergency workers as if nothing had happened. He nearly reached his car. He nearly escaped the jurisdiction before law enforcement arrested him. These are terrible acts that form an indelible stain on his character. There is more to Mr. Miu than his worst acts.
So sorry, guys.
I can tell Mr. Miu has taken this case very seriously. He has been appropriate and respectful in his demeanor in court. I sense that he carries a heavy burden, too. I imagine he is disheartened at the prospect of prison and the uncertainty of his future. But I also sense that Mr. Miu feels genuine sadness and remorse for what happened to his victims. I agree with the comments earlier that our criminal justice system is not designed in a way to allow people to apologize or to alleviate grief or to show respect to victims until a day like today at sentencing. That is unfortunate, but I heard Mr. Miu's words, both today and before, and I think he is sorry. Other than his conduct on July 30, Mr. Miu appears to be a quiet, nonviolent, peaceful man. He's never been in trouble before. He is loved by his family and friends. He's generous with his time. He helps others who are less fortunate or who are in need. Mr. Miu is respected in his community. Several of his personal friends and co-workers submitted letters that describe his character. Those letters were not shared in court today, but some of the most common words they use to describe Mr. Miu are kind, compassionate, friendly, loyal, respectful, and honest. Mr. Miu had to overcome great obstacles in life to achieve his place. He and his family suffered at the brutal hands of the communist regime in Romania. When he was a teenager, he and his family fled. They found asylum in the United States. Here, he adjusted to a new country, new language, new culture. He got good grades in high school. He went on to college in South Dakota. He became an engineer. He worked hard. He had a successful career. I read somewhere in my materials that the proudest moment in Mr. Miu's life was becoming an American citizen. Mr. Miu has no rehabilitative needs. That means he doesn't need rehabilitation. He has no past criminal history. He does not associate with criminals. He has never used illegal drugs. He is not an alcoholic. He has not been diagnosed with a mental health condition, although there is evidence that he's experienced PTSD from July 30 while in the jail. Mr. Miu is educated. He has vocational skills. He has life skills. He's financially secure. He has a stable home. He has positive social supports. He knows the difference between right and wrong. He doesn't need rehabilitation. I mention all of these things to acknowledge that there is a lot more to Mr. Miu than what he did on July 30. I mention these things to recognize that a fair and just sentence takes into account the complete person, not just his worst acts at his lowest moment. Despite the seriousness of Mr. Miu's crimes, the evidence does not show that he poses an imminent risk to the public. Mr. Miu underwent a compass assessment, which is an actuarial tool that measures a person's risk of committing future crimes. Not surprisingly, Mr. Miu scored low risk. He's not a career criminal. He's not a violent predator. Although Mr. Miu may not pose an imminent risk to the public does have a strong interest in holding people accountable who breach the social compact and commit crimes. It's the concept of punishment. Punishment is a sentencing objective. When a person commits a serious crime, that person forfeits rights enjoyed by the law-abiding community. The most restrictive punishments are reserved for those who commit the most serious crimes. The punishment exacts a toll on the offender because of the harm the offender caused to the victim and the community. Taking life and endangering the lives of others are two crimes that warrant significant punishment. Punishment for what Mr. Miu did, but also punishment that recognizes who he is and the circumstances of his crimes. Here, that punishment will involve the loss of liberty, because anything else would depreciate the seriousness of his crimes. So at this time, I will impose the following sentence on Mr. Miu. For count 1, I will impose a term of initial confinement of 20 years, followed by 6 years of extended supervision. For count 2, involving Anthony Carlson, 5 years initial confinement, followed by 5 years of extended supervision. Count 3, involving Dante Carlson, 5 years of initial confinement, followed by 5 years of extended supervision. Count 4, Alexander Martin, 6 years of initial confinement, followed by 5 years of extended supervision. Count 5, Riley Madison, 5 years initial confinement, followed by 5 years of extended supervision. Count 6, Madison Cohen, 270 days of jail. Mr. Miu is not eligible for challenge incarceration program or the earned release program due to his age and the nature of these offenses. The sentences on all 6 counts will run concurrent. I am opposing a concurrent sentence because Mr. Miu's conduct toward each of his victims was part of a single continuous act over a short period of time. The periods of confinement take into consideration Mr. Miu's entire behavior, not just the behavior directed at any one particular individual. The conditions of extended supervision will include the following: maintain absolute sobriety, no possession of drugs or alcohol. You shall not enter any establishment where the primary purpose is the sale of alcohol. This will include places like bars, taverns, liquor stores, beer tents, and the like. You must complete an AODA assessment. He must comply with all recommendations of the Compass Assessment and the Department of Corrections. He must pay court costs and DNA surcharge on each count. He must submit a DNA sample. He may not have any contact with Isaac Schumann's family, including Elena and Danya Hernandez and Scott Schumann. He may not have contact with Alexander Martin, Riley Madison, Anthony Carlson, Dante Carlson, or Madison Cohen. He is responsible for restitution. The state must submit its restitution demand within 30 days. The defense may have 30 days thereafter to object. If there is an objection, the matter will be scheduled for a restitution hearing. Because Mr. Miu is convicted of serious felonies, he may not possess firearms, he may not possess body armor, he may not vote or hold public office until his civil rights are restored. If he were to do any of those things contrary to law, he would subject himself to additional criminal penalties. If he violates the no contact orders, he may also subject himself to additional criminal penalties. Does the state agree on the credit calculation, 732 days?
Yes.
All right, 732 days credit. Mr. Miu is remanded to the custody of the sheriff for delivery to the Dodge Reception Center. Is there anything else for today, Mr. Anderson?
No.
Mr. Nelson?
No, Judge.
All right, thank you all. We stand adjourned.
Wow. It was emotional. Don't get mad, but I'm emotional for both sides. It didn't have to happen. But I have to say, I was very impressed by the judge. 20 years is still awful. He'd be like 70-something when he got out. But I did hear reporters, journalists, whomever you want to say, talking about it, and it's not consecutive like for someone like Daryl, you know, so it's going to be one on top of another. It's not going to be strung out. So in other words, it still looks awful, but I guess he could have had 70 to 100 years. And it was just impressive. To me, I was impressed at how well the judge spoke and seemed to take everything and everyone into consideration. I got to say, I was super impressed by him and his defense attorney who spoke. It looks like, well, in the trial, Mr. Miu was definitely a lot thinner than what he was when the incident, attack, whatever you want to call it, occurred. And he looks even thinner now. He looks, to me, I'm not saying this is like trying to get anyone to feel sorry for him. I'm just saying he looks very unwell. It looked like he had trouble standing up. He's suffering, that's for sure. And if you haven't watched the trial, it is on my video. Like I said, it's probably not beautifully done, but it still gives you a lot of ideas about what happened. He did have heart surgery, recovered. And it also talks about what some of the victims suffered, like AJ. Some of them are on the stand. But anyhow, I am done because this is my second time going through it. And it is, I feel very sad for both sides. None of this really had to happen. But that's how it always is, isn't it? But thank you all so much. I hope this was informative. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting, subscribing. I love you all. Be kind to someone. Be kind to you. Don't drink, for the love of God. I just think alcohol does do a lot. It causes a lot of trouble. But having said that, I will see you the next time.